this strategy, so factoring by grouping, is a little bit different than what we did factoring in chapter 4, factoring quadratics. But we're gonna group things so that we have a common factor that we can pull out. So if we look at this one, x cubed minus 3x squared minus 16x plus 48. If we look through all of those terms, again, first thing we should look for is a greatest common factor. But across all of those, there's nothing in each term that we can pull out. So we don't have a greatest common factor. So we're going to try what's called factoring by grouping. And this most often works when we have, you'll usually use this when you have 4 terms, with it being x to the cubed, x squared, x, and a constant, is when you'll most often see this. It's going to work well when you have an even number of terms. And in Algebra 2, we're not going to do this with anything much higher than x cubed. So they'll all look pretty similar to this. But what we're going to do is group things so that we do have pieces that we can factor out. And I'm going to choose to group x cubed minus 3x squared and the 16x plus 48. And we have to be careful a little bit when we group these, mainly because of that minus right there. Okay, so let's group x cubed minus 3x squared, and we're going to put that into parentheses. So we're going to put parentheses around those. And then we also are going to group the 16x plus the 48, but we have to be careful about putting parentheses there, because if we put parentheses, then we have minus the 16x and minus the positive 48, so we've changed that now. We've made this minus 48 instead of still being plus 48. So if we group in front of a minus sign, we have to make sure that we account for the positive there. So if we put this minus in front that's going to be distributed, we need to change the sign in here to make it minus 48. Because then you see when we distribute this negative, that gives us what we had above, right? That gives us minus 16x and then plus 48. Okay. So we have to be careful when we're grouping. Now that wasn't a problem on the first part, right? That wasn't a problem with the x cubed minus the 3x squared. Okay, because there's not a negative distributed into it now. But what we do in each of these now is there anything that we can factor out in each of these groups? Well, in this first group, x cubed minus 3x squared, there's an x squared that we can take out. So if we pull out x squared, that leaves us with x minus 3, right? Looking in the second set, 16x minus 48, 16 goes into 48. So we can factor out a 16. And if we factor out 16, that leaves us with x minus 48 divided by 16 is 3. So maybe you see where this is going now. We've grouped and we've factored out a little bit. And now in each term, we have this x minus 3. So we're used to just factoring out either x or x squared, or like we just did here, factoring out a 16. But now we have this whole quantity in common, and we can factor that whole thing out to the front. So we factor out x minus 3, and if we pull that out in the front, that leaves us with x squared minus 16. Okay, so grouping and pulling out those smaller pieces gave us a common factor between those two sides. It gave us an x minus 3 in each of those. So we factor out that x minus 3. That leaves us with x squared minus 16. And can we finish factoring that? So we would have x minus 3 And how does x squared minus 16 factor? I think we did that just earlier. That is x minus 4, x plus 4. Okay. So we choose two pairs of things to group. Typically, it will work if you just do the first half and the second half of the polynomial. Sometimes you might have to rearrange things if you see that things might fit better somewhere else. But typically the first two and the last two will work. Okay, so let's look at one more example with this. 27x cubed plus 45x squared minus 3x minus 5. So how do we want to group things? Well, let's just do the first two with the last two. And again, we have to be careful with the second piece because we want this to be a minus 5, right? Right here we want minus 5. And if we put parentheses here, well, now that's minus 3x and minus a negative 5. So to make sure that stays minus 5, we need to change that sign there. Okay. So we've grouped things into that. Let's look at the first one. What can we factor out? So we have 27x cubed plus 45x squared. Well, we have an x squared. And what's the greatest common factor of 27 and 45? What's the largest thing that goes into both of those? That'd be a 9. So we can pull out a 9x squared. And what does that leave us with inside? If we pull out 9x squared, 27 divided by 9 is 3x plus 45 divided by 9 is 5. And the x squared came out. So then we have that minus, is there anything we can pull out over here? 3x plus 5, nothing in common there. So that's just 3x plus 5 in the middle. So now we have this 3x plus 5 times, or 3x plus 5 and 3x plus 5 in both of those, and we can pull those way out to the front. Okay, so this 3x plus 5 comes out, and we have that times what's hanging out, what's left behind, 9x squared minus, right, minus, and then what goes in the next part? We really have just a 1 sitting in front, right? So if we pull that 3x plus 5 out, we have 9x squared minus 1. Okay. And last step, can we factor what we've got there? 3x plus 5 doesn't, so we have 3x plus 5. And this is a difference of squares again, right? Because 9x squared is a 3x squared. So this is going to be 3x minus 1. 3x plus 1 is that polynomial completely factored.